I'm a telematics engineer and I've been in the software industry for the last 14 years of my life. The first thing that I do for this challenge, and what a challenge, it's to create some diagrams, some charts. Usually I create three different charts. The first one is the use case diagram, which is the uh, first diagram that I usually draw. I used to draw on every single project. They have a better idea of the problem and can analyze it better. In this case, we have a client that may have an account or more than one account, which has at the same time some transfer lists. The transfer list may have a filter, different filters. All right. This was in fact the third diagram, the class diagram. As you can see, I didn't finish that. I didn't add the relationship between them simply because I didn't have enough time, even though it's been like a week working on this. Um, the real work on this that because of the availability of my time, was around 4 days. Um, 4 days, of course, working 16 and 17 hours a day in order to try to accomplish this. It was focused more on the mainly on the security. Here we have an account model. Basically, it's an account class which will represent the model, and there is a transaction. As you can see, I didn't finish this one. The second diagram that I wrote was the entity relationship diagram, where we have, and this is for the relational database, which is the most common approach. I could have used the MongoDB, for instance, but I decided to use a relational as it is a more traditional approach. We have an account with some dummy fields here. It could be whatever, and an account and has zero or many transactions with the fields that you suggested, right? Haven't done these diagrams first. After that, I realized um, after that I immediately started working on the code. Um, what I like to use Scrum methodologies usually, but for this purpose I just didn't had enough time to arrange the project as I like to do it. So I decided to create a project based upon three modules. So the project has the Oauth authentication based upon Keycloak. Keycloak is identity manager um, developed by Red Hat. So here is the configuration. This is an embedded integration that we may find in a Spring 5. Uh, older Spring versions used to have their own implementation of the JWT for OAuth, but in this case we have already on the Spring framework an integration with existing providers which are more robust and it has support for different authentication mechanisms. This is based upon Yellow Realm, a Realm JSON, which has all the configuration of the server. This basically is the one that is going to generate the tokens and is going to validate the tokens in order to protect the resource API. This is basically the RESTful API. As you can see, I basically started working on this diagram, which is the model first. We have a one-to-many relationship between these models that I expressed into the Spring data implementation through the annotations one-to-many. So basically in this case, if I get the account, I get the whole transactions that are being received by the transactions model. As you can see here, I'm sorry if I didn't have the time to polish this, right? So many to one with the JSON back reference, letting know which is the sender account. All right. After that, after creating the model, I started working on the repository. The repository is no more than the Spring Data implementation as an interface that has basically three different interfaces, the following interfaces. Um, One is the simplest one, that there is a paging and sort interface in this JPA repository that extends or implements, implements the other two interfaces. So this one contains all the features, all the possible features of Spring Data. Here we define some methods. After that, the repository, I created the service. The service is no more than an abstraction about the service in order to decouple the implementation and the objects. And we basically define the abstractions of the methods that I'm going to use. After that, I create a package. I create a package for the service implementation. Here, I have the definition of the abstraction. Um, because of the inversion of control that Spring provides, I just outward the account repository, which is the one that I'm using here in order to perform all the queries that I need. After having my service implementation, I started working on the controller. The controller basically it's the endpoint where the endpoint are going to be. And the controller is a REST controller. It has also some Swagger 2 implementations because I love this way of documenting the REST API, RESTful API. This is really important, especially for new, not only for documentation of the project, but also for new developers when they come into this RESTful API, they may figure out that we already have a documentation, very clear documentation with Swagger. You could even run the queries. I'm going to show you an example about this that I have over here. In fact, after this explanation of these three modules that I created for this challenge, I'm going to show you that implementation. All right. Having said that, I created different endpoints on different entities, but not all of them are being used in the front end. Also, some course implementation, so we make sure that only our own front end it's able to consume these services. This is another documentation. Unfortunately, because of the security layer, we won't be able to see the Swagger HTML, which was some of the things that I want to show you. Anyhow, it's already implemented. We'll need just more time in order to figure out exactly how to render or make sure that we can see the Swagger HTML. But anyhow, I'm going to show you an example at the end of this conversation. Also, I centralized the exceptions. Always like to centralize these so I don't have to write the same exceptions everywhere. But centralize the exception allow me to handle the exceptions in a more scalable way and easier to maintain in the future. This is the Swagger configuration, basically. What else do I have here? Okay, there's something else I want to show you. Okay, this is pretty much what where I'm going to write the documentation and some other pieces of the code. Also, we have a secure layer configuration. Remember that we were using JW in Oauth2 server configuration using JWT or the token exchange in order to validate and protect our RESTful API. All right, so here in the secure layer, we have basically a security configuration that extends from web security configure adapter. I added the cores and the authorized methods. In this case, we're just running this couple of methods, so I didn't allow the others for the moment. And also I defined that I was using an Oauth2 resource server using the JWT implementation that handles the token. Also, I created some dummy data over here since Spring Data by default reads this data SQL file, which will basically generate the basic model. In this case, I created 4 different accounts. 2 of them are my own accounts, and they're based upon the document. All right. In some transaction, I defined 10 transactions. My first account generated 3 transactions for the account 3, and my second account generated other 5 transactions for the 4th account. All right, this is just dummy data. After that, let me introduce the third module, which is basically a front end. It's a Springboot application that uses Soul library, which is a router for created by Netflix. This router allows us to define, as its name mentioned, the route path for them. So here I have some configuration about it. All right, I have some configuration about it. So, and in the order of ideas, basically what we have here, it's the way to handle the server, the post request. So the backend will be the one that generates the call to the authorization server based on Keycloak by Red Hat. So we protect the front end in order to avoid direct access in order to get this token and security failures. This is pretty much, it generates a cookie as well with that information. And some other configurations for Soul, filter, and other different configurations necessary for the application. All right. This is basically the front end implementation. I'm going to show you in a moment the front end itself, which has been implemented in Angular 12. This is the latest Angular. And I want to show you a little bit about this POM of the front end. This POM application, it's pointing as the parent for Springboot 2.2.6. Some Zool configuration versions, dependency, and here a plugin in order to with the Node and npm version that I needed in order to run this code. Initially, I performed the install with the npm and the build, and that's pretty much what I needed. I defined where to put the code resources as well, where to get them, and that's pretty much what I have about the front end. All right, about the front end itself, this is the Angular application. We have basically a a simple Angular application. We have here the front end, which is no more than a portion of HTML code that has been restricted, but it's locked in variable, which is basically a Boolean variable with some buttons and code protected. I created this additional module, the app transaction. All right. Instead of the home, I basically handle the token acquisition. I was having some issues with a cookie, so I had to get rid of this. Probably this would generate some a few console issues that I will need more time in order to fix them. Also, the login, the logout, and the refresh token process, which is based upon this application service. The application service basically is the main service that I have in order to consume the, the token or the key cloak authorization server endpoints and be able to add the authorization headers and everything necessary in order to consume them. All right. The transaction component is basically it's composed by two different things. I added that material library for this application, so we can see the material drop down, and the material drop down basically it's receiving the accounts. Is defining a behavior once it changes, which basically will have to refresh the transactions. In order to build the table, I did use a grid Angular library, which it's very comfortable, and I've seen a couple of companies where I've worked, and I feel so comfortable working with them. And TypeScript side of the component, um, we can see that basically I define some the columns for the AG grid. I define some of the endpoints that I need. The first endpoint is going to get my username. In this case, is my ID. Um, is my ID the one that I send you on the email. Um, and the password is just pass, PASS. All right. So having this document, after that, I have to call the accounts per document. Okay. So that's what I call here on ng init. I basically added the headers, the necessary headers in order to consume those services. So I get this URL first in order to get the information. RxJS, in order to create sequential calls, because the second call depends on the first one, I had to use concat map, which basically receives the result of the first one and allow me to consume the second service based upon the result of the first one. Allowing me to get the username, in this case is my ID, and adding the headers for that call. Once I have these results, I subscribe to that observable. Once I subscribe that observable, I get the accounts into the accounts list. This is for the drop down. The selected account by default is the first account of the list, and the selected transactions are the ones that came with the accounts. Because of a lack of the time, I couldn't finish some of the details of the challenge, as retrieving only the last month transactions, which will require either to detach the transactions from the account. So we look for the accounts for the transactions once the user selects the account, and I could limit in that way, or override some of the default repository um, methods in order to get only the last month method. That's the thing that I was doing, but unfortunately I didn't have enough time to do it. Anyhow, most part of the challenge is done. I would say most important part of the challenge, which is the security, which is the front-end usage, not only of the libraries as RxJS and Material, but also the services and the component itself, and the security management of the front end inside of a Springboot application with the Soul library. Having said this, let's take a look at the test. Let me just show you a little bit about the package JSON. You can ignore this component that I created here. This was for testing purposes, the account component. All right. So about the package, I just want to show you some of the versions that I used. I did use AGGrid, AGGrid community, and I did use Angular material. Okay, those are basically the main libraries that I use inside of Angular 12. Okay, having said that, let's take a look at the result. It is already running all of those three services. In order for you to run this, you just have to clean and install every single project, starting with the authorization, followed by the resource server, and finishing with the authorization code Angular Soul, which basically has a header here, a login button, which should redirect me to the Keycloak service. So I'm going to put my username, which is my ID, 9867018. The password is pass. I log into this, and I immediately got the application itself. I'm sorry, this is just because of a delay. I got this accounts that belongs to that ID that I just logged in through the Keycloak embedded service into Spring 5. And once I switch this, I just load the list of every single account. This AGGrid is very comfortable, as we can have sort, we can have filters here as well, as you requested on the test. Let's use a filter, let's say contains and versions. Alright, so it automatically filters that. There is a refresh token button, alright, and a logout button. And that was it. Pretty much the implementation. I want to say that thank you because of this opportunity. It was a great opportunity to learn a little bit more about Keycloak. Let me show you a little bit more about this Keycloak service or server dashboard. We may have different mechanisms to authenticate with this Keycloak implementation. And it's just a question of taking a look at the dashboard, the administration dashboard, and try to figure out exactly what we need or what we want to accomplish. Right? Okay, it's taking a little bit more than what I expected. But anyhow. All right, here is the dashboard implementation. We can generate users here or define users. As we can see, we have two different users here. We can see the sessions. We can define the clients. In this case, the client is my application. Clients scopes, clients' roles. So it's a really interesting tool, and I think in an enterprise environment, this will be very useful, and I'm pretty confident many of these uh, huge enterprise around the world is using this technology. You can see we can use Psalm, we can use OpenID, Keycloak, OpenID Connect between any other among any other many other social network authorizations. All right, thank you very much for this opportunity. It was a pleasure to work on this. Um, I want to apologize because of the delay. It's been a very busy week. I didn't have enough time to work on this, but finally I make it happen. After this video, I'm gonna send you as well the and once again the the code as I realized today checking this service that the issue that I was having that I told you here with the cookie uh, was not solved, so I have to comment this and generate the token on load of the home component, force it in order to retrieve it in the right way and avoid issues on the rendering of the application. I want to say thank you very much for this opportunity. It was a pleasure to me to work on this. I learned a lot of new things, even though I already have done like two different Oauth2 implementations in the past. It's been a while without touching it, and touching it once again taught me a couple of new things about Keycloak, and oh, well, I'm really happy all the time to learn. I want to say thank you very much for this opportunity. And if you decide to work with me, I can say that I'm ready to give 150% of myself, as I'm always trying to do in all my projects and everything that I do. All right, thank you very much. Have a wonderful day. Take care.